Hello everyone and welcome to Pinnacle Gamers Lounge. Today we start a new series called Ship Comparisons, where we will compare two same tiered and same type of ships based on your opinions. And today with public opinion, we have decided to pitch Prinz Eitel Freidrich, the recently launched premium ship, against the old warhorse HMS Warspite. So before we start the video, I'd request you all to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video and hit the bell icon to stay notified. And finally, share this video with your friends and comment in the comment section the next pair which you'd like to see compared. Well, with this, let's begin the video. Before we go into statistical comparisons, let me initially tell you that Prinz Eitel Freidrich is a Mackensen class of battle cruiser, while HMS Warspite is a Queen Elizabeth class of battleship. The Queen Elizabeth class was also designed to be a battle cruiser, but with her armor and British layout, she became more of a battleship. So, with these two things in mind, we need to go into the comparisons. So, let's begin. So, the first data which we will compare is the base hit points. So, Prinz Eitel Freidrich has a base hit point of 38,870, while HMS Warspite has a base hit points of 40,480. So we have nearly 2,000 hit points difference between both the ships, and that is not much. That is not a very massive difference, keeping the fact in mind that Prinz Eitel Freidrich is a battle cruiser and HMS Warspite a battleship. But still, having health below 40,000 in or at tier 6 is a bit of a problem. Thus, we have hit point enhancers in place like the camouflage and the preventative maintenance pack, which increases the total hit points by about 7%. And putting those enhancers in it, the maximum hit points can for Prinz Eitel Freidrich can be reached as about 41,591, which somehow crosses the 40% mark or the 40,000 mark, which makes this ship viable. So it's very much understandable that we very much need to bring in the camouflage as well as a preventative maintenance pack into the picture so that this ship becomes viable. And anyway, HMS Warspite always had a bit of a higher health pool with 43,314 after enhancement. So this makes the ship quite viable. Now let us look at survivability statistics. So both the Prinz Eitel Freidrich and HMS Warspite have similar citadel protection with 12.5% and fire and filling resistance at 10%. And this is quite acceptable because both Prinz Eitel Freidrich and HMS Warspite were built around the same time, that is in the early 1900s. So they have very similar citadel protection techniques as well as nearly the same deck armor. So we have fire and filling resistance at 10%, which is acceptable, and citadel protection of 12.5%, which is also quite decent. But the real difference between Prinz Eitel Freidrich and HMS Warspite comes out in the fact that Prinz Eitel Freidrich is a battle cruiser, so she has thinner armor, and HMS Warspite is a battleship, so she has a better set of armor. Thus, the damage reduction, that is the capability of the armor to resist damage, is 12% in Prinz Eitel Freidrich in comparison to 13.5% in HMS Warspite, which is better in HMS Warspite. On the same note, underwater protection, that is torpedo damage reduction, is much less in Prinz Eitel Freidrich, that is 12% stock and 18% enhanced. While in HMS Warspite, we have torpedo damage reduction of 15% stock and 21% enhanced, thus making it clear that in close range combat or close range engagements, Prinz Eitel Freidrich is not a winner, which is a bummer in case because all German ships are known to be brawlers, not Prinz Eitel Freidrich, because it has lower health as well as weaker armor and underwater protection. Thus, this ship is not something you'd like to go directly and brawl with. Now that the ship has survived any attack, it's time to keep moving and check the maneuverability stats. So, Prinz Eitel Freidrich has a maximum speed of 26.67 knots and an enhanced speed of 28.8 knots, which in comparison to HMS Warspite, which has a maximum speed of 23.34 knots and enhanced of 25.21 knots, is quite an increase. Because if you understand, you might have better armor, but if you cannot disengage as soon, it would be a problem. So here, Prinz Eitel Freidrich is a winner because it has better speed. Now comparing the maximum traverse speed, Prinz Eitel Freidrich has 5.5 degrees per second in comparison to HMS Warspite at 6.4 degrees per second. It also is better for Prinz Eitel Freidrich. Turn time is a bit high in Prinz Eitel Freidrich with 12 seconds in comparison to 11.1 second in HMS Warspite, but well, that is not of much of a difference. The time to take full speed, that is how fast the ship accelerates, is 21.82 seconds. Thus, the acceleration of the ship is 1.32 knots per second in case of Prinz Eitel Freidrich, whereas in HMS Warspite, the time to full speed is 22.46 seconds. Thus, the acceleration is required is 1.12 knots per second. Thus, it is fractionally low in case of HMS Warspite, but if you understand microtransactions and micro interactions, make the game what it is. So a few 0.2 knots per second acceleration decrease can mean a lot of things in this game. So you might never know. Thus, in this regards, in regard of maneuverability, Prinz Eitel Freidrich wins over HMS Warspite. Let's bring in the big boys, and we are comparing the main gun statistics now. So, the Prinz Eitel Freidrich has guns which has reload time of 19 seconds in comparison to 21 seconds of HMS Warspite. Target traverse speed of 5.5 degrees per second in comparison to 4.5 degrees per second for Warspite. Range of 12.38 kilometers for Prinz Eitel Freidrich in comparison to 12.26 kilometers in Warspite. They have the same number of guns of 8, and dispersion factor for Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 0.625, whereas in Warspite is 0.75. Thus, the statistics are numbers. Let me explain to you what I mean. The Prinz Eitel Freidrich, the guns reload faster than Warspite. The turrets turn a bit slower than the Warspite, of course. Range is a bit longer, but dispersion at long ranges, that is dispersion factor, is extremely bad. 0.625 is just about average, while HMS Warspite's 0.75 is above average or decent. So, well, in this regard, you can say that Prinz Eitel Freidrich and HMS Warspite are on an even footing, because even though Prinz Eitel Freidrich has faster reload, HMS Warspite can do much more damage at one salvo. So, keeping both of them equal, let's get to the AP and HE damage for the main guns. So, the HE shell damage for Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 794 in comparison to HMS Warspite's whopping 1150, which is a massive difference. And thus, putting the calculations for different interactions, HE can half pen. So half penetration HE damage is 397 for Prinz Eitel Freidrich in comparison to Warspite's 575. So directly you can understand that using HE in Warspite is quite rewarding in comparison to Prinz Eitel Freidrich. Yes, Eitel Freidrich has better HE than other ships of her tier, that is German ships of her tier, that is Bayern, but it is not the best, at least. We'll compare Bayern and Eitel Freidrich again in a later video, but till now we can say that she has decent shell ballistics and shell damage for HE, but not as good as Warspite, because of course Warspite is made to spam HE sometimes. Then going on to the AP shells, the AP shells of Prinz Eitel Freidrich causes 1553 hit points damage in comparison to Warspite 1610. So you can directly see how good the AP shells of Prinz Eitel Freidrich are, which are in comparison with HMS Warspite. Warspite is known to have very lethal AP shells. Prinz Eitel Freidrich will have very similar, extremely lethal shells. So different interactions we will see. AP can half penetrate. So half penetration Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 776 damage in comparison to Warspite's 805. AP overpen is 388, while Warspite's 402. And finally, Citadel penetrated AP shells caused 3832 damage for Prinz Eitel Freidrich in comparison to Warspite's 4025. So you can see there's not a massive difference in damage output when comparing the ships. Okay, so we will later on go and look at the damage per minute DPM of both ships in a later stage in this video, but till then we can say that overall in HE standards Warspite has won, while in AP both have an equal standing. Now, let's look at the secondary gun statistics. It's interesting to note that both HMS Warspite and Prinz Eitel Freidrich have auto and manual secondary guns. So let's look at the secondary guns which are manual at first, and then we will look at the automatic secondary guns. So for manual secondary guns, the reload time of Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 6.9 seconds compared to 8 seconds in HMS Warspite. Range is 5.74 kilometers in PEF. I will call Prinz Eitel Freidrich as PEF or PEF. So let's call it PEF. So for PEF, range is 5.74 kilometers in comparison to Warspite's 5.4 kilometers. And turret traverse speed is 8 degrees per second in comparison to 10 degrees per second. So which we have noticed there's a trend that the turrets of HMS Warspite or the British ship turns faster than the German counterparts, but they have shorter range and takes longer to reload. Now let's see about the damage, and interestingly the AP damage for both Prinz Eitel Freidrich and HMS Warspite are completely same, and yes, they shoot AP shells as secondary shells. So AP shell damage for both is 518, AP half penetration is 259, over penetration is 129, and citadel penetration is 777. So overall in this statistical regard, for manual secondary guns, both ships look good, at least in the DMG part or damage output part, but since Prinz Eitel Freidrich reloads faster and has a longer range, you can say that the overall output of damage is better in this regard. Now let's look at the automatic guns. So Prinz Eitel Freidrich has a reload time of 6 seconds, while Warspite has 7 seconds. Range is 3.7 kilometers, while range is 4 kilometers in HMS Warspite. Finally, somewhere good. So these the AP, they don't shoot AP here, they shoot HE in this regard. So HE shell damage for automatic secondaries for Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 207 in comparison to 224 in case of Warspite. HE half penetrations is 103 in comparison to 112 for Warspite, 103 for Prinz Eitel Freidrich. And we'll look at the fire chances, which we forgot to talk about. In auto secondaries, fire chances is same at 1%, but in case of Prinz Eitel Freidrich, for main guns, it has 9% in comparison to Warspite's 11%. So far, you can say that secondary guns automatic, Warspite takes the cake because she has slower reload but higher range as well as better shells. So in no way you can say Warspite is weaker in comparison to Prinz Eitel Freidrich in case of auto secondaries. And of course, in terms of fire chances, HMS Warspite has a higher fire chance, even though if RNGesus decides not to put fires on HMS Warspite and put fires on by Prinz Eitel Freidrich, that is completely out of the equation, but you cannot decide what can be done. So with discussion, let's end the topic of weaponry by talking on the average DMG or DPM, average DPM of the main guns. So we're using a formula which speaks as dispersion factor or delta multiplied by number of guns, that is N, and damage done, average damage done, D, into 60 seconds per minute, because there's 60 seconds per minute. We take the entire numerator and divide it by the reload time, that is R, which works in seconds. Thus we get the damage output per minute. In that scenario, the main guns of Prinz Eitel Freidrich have a HE damage output or DPM of 12,536 hit points damage per minute in comparison to HMS Warspite's 19,714, which is very much high for Warspite. Similarly, comparing the AP shells, Prinz Eitel Freidrich's AP damage is 24,521 in comparison to Warspite's 27,600. Thus, we can clearly see that in Eitel Freidrich, it is rewarding to use the AP shells in comparison to Warspite, where using both the shells give nearly the same result. Yes, you might say 19,000, 27,000, not much of a difference. Enemies will not be shooting such high amount of broadsides every moment. Correct? So you can compare both of them and you can say that HMS Warspite is more rewarding in both shells, while in Prinz Eitel Freidrich is more rewarding with the AP shells. Well, this ends the part of the guns. Let's go into the A and the concealment. In the department of anti-aircraft armament, the things get a bit confusing and a bit interesting as well. Because if you can see, the large caliber AA damage for Prinz Eitel Freidrich is 221 compared to 74 of Warspite. Yes, 74. And they have a longer range in PEF at 3.3 kilometers compared to 3 kilometers in Warspite. And clearly we can say that Warspite has a much weaker large caliber AA damage in comparison to Prinz Eitel Freidrich. Well, in small caliber AA damage, however, Prinz Eitel Freidrich is weaker with 69 compared to Warspite's 104, and the range is same as 1.5 kilometers. Thus, we can assume that at long ranges, Prinz Eitel Freidrich will be a better option, and thus Prinz Eitel Freidrich can be used as a screening unit. That means we can be a support for other battleships in case it is required to screen the sky, but HMS Warspite becomes a more viable option if you want self-defense. It means Prinz Eitel Freidrich will be able to defend itself at long distances, but when it comes near, it becomes a bit of a problem. But Warspite can defend herself, and not necessarily it can defend the other members of her team. Thus, this is anti-aircraft armament, which is a very interesting section of the comparison. Finally, the shortest part of our discussion, that is surface detection. Prinz Eitel Freidrich has a smaller surface detection of 10.68 kilometers in comparison to 10.8 kilometers of Warspite, and this finally clarifies the reason that Prinz Eitel Freidrich is, after all, a battle cruiser, and it has a little smaller area of detection compared to HMS Warspite's 10.8 kilometers. Thus, this is the end of the comparison. Let me give you my final thoughts. Well, this is the end of the first comparison that we ever did, and I must say that it has very interesting results. We clearly saw that there are many sections where Prinz Eitel Freidrich is very good. In terms of speed, in terms of it's outstanding in comparison to Warspite. But there are few things which are very important and Warspite does better in them. Like in main gun performance, Warspite is decent, much decent in comparison to Prinz Eitel Freidrich. Yes, I won't say Eitel Freidrich has bad guns. It doesn't have bad guns. It can have very good gameplay with Prinz Eitel Freidrich. But Warspite has better guns, better ballistics, and better playability, because in Prinz Eitel Freidrich you won't be very much rewarded for using your HE, but in Warspite you are assured to have high fire, more damage, and also you can reload the particular thing slower, but you know that the time taken to reload the guns are rewarding in Warspite in comparison to Eitel Freidrich, where you are not sure if your HE will actually do some damage. While comparing to DDs, I believe that both will perform good, but the only tension or the only point of question is the fact that Prinz Eitel Freidrich has a very high dispersion, very low dispersion ratio or dispersion factor, that is high dispersion happens. So lower the dispersion factor, the higher your dispersion. So it has 0.625 dispersion factor, which is a problem because most of our shells have a capability or chance of being missed by a destroyer, which is a very small target in comparison to Warspite, which is a very concentrated way of putting out shells. And thus I think that in DD2 battleship comparison, HMS Warspite will anyways win any day. And that is how the entire battleship line for British was made, to be defenders against destroyers. But in comparison to Prinz Eitel Freidrich, when comparing to cruisers or battleships, I think Prinz Eitel Freidrich will have nearly the same performance as HMS Warspite. So as for final thoughts, I would tell that Prinz Eitel Freidrich is something which you can spend $10 on. You can buy this ship in the Brits Pass this time because she is a decent ship. She is a decent battleship. So with this, we come to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, share the video to your friends, and also remember to comment about the next pair of ships you'd like us to compare. With this, Pinnacle Gamers Lounge ends the first episode of Ship Comparisons. Thank you and have a great day ahead. Thank you.